Okay, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, okay, depending where you are in the globe. So thank you for joining this, this session on BOS Input Common Service, basically on gender responsive procurement. My name is Karin Lopez. I am with the DCO Latin American Regional and Latin American Caribbean Regional Office, and I'm the Regional Admin and BOS Coordinator for the region. So basically, I mean, we'll be having this discussion around an hour with our colleagues from UN Women, and who will support us in explaining about the gender responsive procurement and how you can include this into your BOS, and of course, work collaboratively in your offices with all the entities locally. So a few housekeeping items before we begin. So please feel free to ask all your questions. I mean, you can do it into the QA session by the end of the webinar, or you can write your questions and comments on the chat box. We will be following up and answering as we go during the session. If we're not able to answer any of your questions, well, we'll do the follow-up so you can then after the webinar, so we can respond on whatever question is pending. You can also raise your hand at the end when we are in the QA session, unmute your mic, and therefore you'll be able to ask a specific question to the panelists. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation so we do not interrupt the panelists, and of course at the end you'll be able to open up. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording, also be sharing the slides, and then any other additional resources after the webinar. As you know, this webinar is part of a series of webinars that have been implemented in high impact common services, and all those webinars are available for you, and therefore you'll be able to have access to them later on. So as I said before, this webinar covers the high impact common service on gender responsive procurement, and on how you can collaborate on inclusive and gender responsive procurement, and how you can play a key role in advancing gender parity and equity in and outside of the UN. So let me a little bit introduce the agenda. Oops, sorry, I'm going to move to the next slide. Sorry for that. Okay, there. I'm multitasking here. So let me introduce the agenda and of course today's speakers. So first of all, we're going to be giving a brief overview of the high impact common service and how they fit in the greater picture of the business operations strategy, or the BOS. We will have a high level refresher and overview of the gender responsive procurement from Miho Abe and Anton Kukuba from UN Women, okay, procurement specialists in policy and operations respectively. And then we'll have a specific example of one of the countries, Bangladesh, and we'll hear from Najul Haider, okay, who from UN Women Bangladesh, which will explain and let us know how this has impact positively in the work that they've been doing at the country level. Our colleagues from UN Women HQ will also share how to include gender responsive procurement into your BOS, and of course you'll have time at the end to ask any of your questions. And in the QA session, if you then have any questions and would like to take advantage of having the UN Women colleagues on the call. But with that, we will conclude the session. We do expect no more than 1 hour. And well, if we go a few minutes beyond the time, sorry, apologies for that, but we'll try to stick into the time. So let me just change here. Okay, on the high impact common services. Okay, basically, what do we want? What's the intention of a high impact common service, or what do we like to do with a high common service? The high impact common services are those that have been determined based on all the 131 BOSes that have been already globally developed and are being implemented, is to really try to understand which services then have a high impact. Either is on the cost, either is on in quality, or either it is also on the SDG impact. Basically, that's what we want to focus on, and we want to encourage offices to keep on moving towards working collaboratively on those high impact common services. So we have those, for example, who are based on good practices, okay, also who can help us then into moving, working together collaboratively to have implementing them. And we have focused basically into, we could say 3 areas, but we have several, but basically on the gender inclusion, on the disability inclusion, and on environmental sustainability. Okay, basically, those are the areas we're looking into now. Of course, as we move forward with the BOS development and we're working collaboratively, we will have more and more services coming coming up as high income services. So they have a broader impact on cost avoidance and on quality improvement with a streamlined process and leveraging best practices of other UNCTs. And the idea of also having these webinars is for you to get to know what's being done in other countries and get to know from those good practices and be able to apply into your countries and see if you can also have then some positive results on working collaboratively on those high income premises. They facilitate to identify, scale, and discover opportunities for efficiency. Okay, and this also applies for universities that have already selected the service, but may not be using them at a full potential. So ideally, we would like all UNCTs to start working into these high income common services, and of course, having them at a full potential. They bring you gains, not only on cost avoidance, but also in quality. And the data also provides the whole system with feedback into streamlining the UNCT's efforts and best practices. So the high impact common services are divided into 6 categories. They're all tied to the 2030 agenda. Okay, and some of these categories might be overlapped. So today, with the support of UN Women colleagues, we'll be looking into the gender inclusion, and as I said before, on the gender responsive procurement. So if we look, for example, at this slide, we have on the left column, we have those common services which currently on the 131 BOSs have the highest cost avoidance. Okay, the right column has the specific services based on those high impact common services that I have mentioned before. So we can see these services which are applicable, you can see, sorry, which services are applicable to your UNCT, and you have them on your BOS. When you go into the different services in the categories on your BOS, you have these services there also, and you can choose and develop as collaboratively as country teams. So we're gonna, here you have some specificities of each one of the services. For example, in disability inclusion, we would like to see how to create the best environment and remove barriers to include persons with disabilities in our premises, communications, leadership, and so on. On good practices, we would like to include some of the administrative efficiencies, like the booking hub or the UN fleet, like a rideshare app for UN fleets, where colleagues can book fleet and carpooling, as well as manage fleets digitally, maximizing usage of fleets. And I mean, these services, they have already been put into practice in several offices, and we already have agencies which are doing this basically worldwide. On environmental sustainability services, we're working with best practices from the environmental program and UNDP to create standard suites of services and shift to carbon neutral and green energy in our premises. And on gender inclusive, well, basically is to create the environment to promote and support businesses with gender strategies to promote gender diversity, equity, and inclusion in and outside of the UN. We have several examples basically that we could use and we could share, but we are looking forward then to have all of these, at least the major number of them, implemented at country offices. So we have some examples, okay, that we can share basically on the environmental sustainability services and also on disability inclusion. Okay, so there are funds available for the UNC teams in case your UNCT is interested in using and working more deeply into these high income services. So there's the possibility of getting funds to do your business case and be able then to prepare your plan, also look into the return of investment, and then what would be your expected CO2 emissions reductions and savings by working collaboratively. So the team in New York is here to support. If you ever identify the need of support from any of us, please feel free to reach out. And with this Diego Cobb, which is a focal point on the high impact common service, we will see how on the financial part, we could also support on developing your business case. So far, we have 12 UNC teams who are preparing business cases. You can see their names there in the screen. We have, for example, for renewable energy, we have Ghana, Lesotho, Namibia, Nigeria, South Sudan, Zambia, and Zimbabwe in Africa. In LAC, we have Haiti. In Arab states, we have Lebanon. And in ECA, we have Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. And also you can see on the right side of the screen, same cases for disability inclusion. Also, we have several countries looking into this and trying to elaborate the business cases in order to have efficiencies on these high impact common services. We are expecting, as we move forward into this, of course, that all 131 UNC teams will be able then to get into this type of projects. Okay, so basically it's an overall overview of what the high impact common services is. I mean, this is not the first webinar we've had on this, so you are fully aware of all the different high impact common services that we have and what you could look into basically at country level. We're here to support. And I'm now gonna pass the floor to Miho and Antons, who's gonna get more into detail on the gender responsive procurement. So over to you, Miho.
Thank you, Karin. Hello, everyone. So let me share my screen. And as I'm introduced earlier, my name is Miho Abe. I'm procurement specialist, responsible for procurement policy, but also that includes gender responsive procurement area. I'm very happy to be here today. So let me start from definitions. The concept of GRP and other relevant terms. So gender responsive procurement is the sustainable selection of goods, service, and works that considers how the procurement activities and decisions impact then gender equality and women's empowerment. So it really goes beyond cost avoidance, cost management, and consider a bigger social impact. And I think this makes so much more sense to UN procurement overall than any other entities, because we are the steward of the public funding. And another term you hear so many times throughout this presentation is women-owned businesses. This is a legal entity in any field that has at least 51% independent ownership by one or more women. Also, unconditional control over the business and independence from non-women-owned businesses. And lastly, I want to also introduce the third concept, which is a gender responsive supplier or vendor. This is slightly different than the women-owned businesses. It is a legal entity that promotes gender equality and meet local and international labor and human rights standards. So it could be women-owned or it can be male-owned. The ownership doesn't matter here. We talk about the company that promotes gender equality in the workplace so that more employees, including women, can benefit from decent working conditions. Then let's also want to talk about the GRP and in relation to SDGs. So just by looking at the concept of gender responsive procurement earlier, you may realize how it actually aligns with sustainable development goals. So we have three main goals to that GRP contribute. The first one is goal 5 on gender equality. So we realize women's economic empowerment through procurement. The second one is goal 8 on decent work and economic growth. In UN supply chains, we promote suppliers that do not discriminate and provide decent working conditions so that all employees, whether women or men, can benefit. We also work to meaningfully include women in the economy. Therefore, we contribute to inclusive economic growth, and this is how GRP contribute to SDG goal 8. Lastly, there's goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. And here there's a very specific target on sustainable procurement practices. In sustainable procurement, there are 3 pillars, principles. Firstly, the protection of the environment. Secondly, economic benefit. And thirdly, social impact. So again, gender is a part of sustainable public procurement. And we cannot call procurement to be sustainable if you don't include gender or any other consideration on social impact. So if we achieve gender equality, inclusive economic growth, and responsive consumption and production, sustainable fabric procurement, there will be a spillover effect to other SDGs. And given that the UN system as a whole spent nearly $30 billion worth of goods and service in 2021 alone, you can see the magnitude of the market that we are operating in and the positive impact we can make by incorporating gender responsiveness in the UN procurement, including BOS. Also, there is a significant opportunities for women-owned businesses to tap into this market. Let's continue with some of the facts and figures. So women-owned businesses are concentrated in SMEs, small and medium enterprises sector, and around 30% are owned by women. Also, 31 to 38% of formal SMEs in the emerging market are owned by women. So why do we talk about formal sector? Because UN only does business with formal companies when it comes to procurement. But if you look at the informal sector, of course, the figure may be much, much higher, but this is another story. Looking at the global GDP, around 20% of GDP is produced by women-owned SMEs. So they contribute to the economy significantly. About public procurement in general, up to 20% of global GDP comes from public procurement. And this figure is much, much higher in developing countries. And only 1% of all public procurement spend goes to women-owned businesses. On one hand, we see the significant contribution to those women to the economy, but then we see very limited procurement opportunities they are enjoying. So this gives us the idea of the inequalities that we are dealing with. And really, this is the reason why it is so important for the UN, the biggest public procurement entities, to take affirmative action to encourage women-owned businesses to participate in the high-impact common service procurement defined under the BOS framework. And let's talk about the barriers, common barriers when implementing GRP. This is from both UN perspective, but also from a women-owned businesses perspective to join or tap into the UN procurement opportunities. So first of all, from women-owned businesses point of view, there's a limited knowledge about the UN business opportunities generally, such as very basic information as to where to find a tender notice. That's one of the key barriers. And there is a lack of access to finance and capital for women. So there are fewer women-owned businesses in the market. Limited access to business networks and skills. So even if we find women-owned businesses, very often we find that they are not yet qualified to be competitive in our procurement. As you know, in the UN procurement, we have very strict, stringent requirement. And also this time poverty. Women need to spend significant time on household and family care work. And this is one of the key root causes of women's inability to be involved in the economy with undivided attention and just have the time to prepare a quality bid to win the business with UN. We cannot forget the context of socially, culturally, and legally discriminatory norms when it comes to women's economic activities. And we know that no country in the world has reached gender equality. So there are prevailing universal barriers, wherever country we look at. And on top of the layer of the slide, current slide, you see the challenges that we are facing as a UN procurement practitioners. First of all, we have few organizations that successfully implemented GRP. And we don't have many peer organizations to learn from. So we are learning it by doing it. Secondly, we need to build the capacity to support UN procurement practitioners, buyers. We have excellent procurement professionals, but we need them to be able to apply gender perspectives to their work. GRP is a relatively new area and also evolving constantly. And that's why we need this continuous capacity building effort, like this refresher session we are doing today. Then we need more tools and more guidance to operationalize GLP modalities and concepts. There is no UN policy on GLP so far. So UN policy, like model, standardized, harmonized policy on GLP. But the good news is there is ongoing UN-wide effort to develop and introduce the UN system policy on GLP, which I will touch upon later. Another problem we are seeing is the voluntary nature of GLP. Because of the less quantifiable nature of gender responsive requirement and criteria, UN entities and procurement practitioners are hesitant to implement gender aspect in tender evaluation or suppliers' KPIs in the contract. So what is being done in the system to break some of the barriers we talked about? UN Interagency GLP Task Force was established in 2019 to bridge the gap, create a harmonized framework on GLP in the UN. UN Women chairs the task force, and there are about 20 UN entities in the task force, and membership is open to any entities in the UN system. There are 3 key deliverables in the task force. The one is to jointly create UN GLP policy, then GLP implementation guidelines for practitioners as well as senior management decision makers, and also build capacity among the UN to successfully implement GLP. And in this page, you can see the 7-step action plan. These are more detailed deliverables of the task force. The policy and guideline document were already drafted and being reviewed by the task force right now. These documents will be then presented at the UN Procurement Network in April 2023, where the UN entities head of procurement jointly decide the approval. So how do we incorporate GLP in a procurement cycle? When dealing with GLP, we cannot emphasize enough on best value for money. As you all know, best value for money is about how well the goods and services meet its social, environmental, economic, and overall strategic objective of the UN. So it considers both monetary and non-monetary component, like social impact and environmental consideration. So GLP is very much embedded or integral part of best value for money. And GLP should be incorporated into all steps of the procurement process. This is very important, right from the start to the very end. So let's look at the key steps. At the planning stage for common services, goods, procurement professionals from different agencies in a country team, jointly work to define the needs, break down the component of services and goods required, then decide which categories of services, goods may be well suited for women-owned businesses. And then when at the specification or terms of reference developing stage, the general advice we have on how to make them gender-friendly is not to over-specify more than necessary and make it in proportion to what's required, like value, volume. Also consider where applicable and appropriate to make the requirement into smaller lots so that women-owned businesses, which tend to be also small enterprises, can compete effectively. At this stage, you should also determine which gender-related evaluation criteria can be included in the solicitation document, because no new criteria, gender-related or not, can be added as an afterthought after the bid closing date. When publishing the tender notice, it's important to advertise publicly on UN Global Marketplace, but also do a proactive outreach through multiple platforms and media such as local newspapers, radio, official website, and social media. If your country has a women-owned businesses association, then it's a good practice to disseminate tender opportunities through such networks. It's important to reach as many women-owned businesses as possible, in addition to traditional established suppliers. As for evaluation, as mentioned earlier, gender-related criteria or otherwise should be predefined and included. So the point here is to give incentives to gender-responsive suppliers, whether it's women-owned or not. And we'll explain more about examples of gender-related evaluation criteria later. At the award stage, we encourage debriefing unsuccessful suppliers as much as practically possible. It's time-consuming, but it's a good practice to provide them meaningful feedback. And that is your way to build their capacity as well for future tenders. And at the post-contract, which is contract management stage, there are things you can do as well. And the first one is the prompt payment. I talked about the lack of access to finance as one of the key barriers earlier. And it's difficult for small, medium, women-owned businesses to stay afloat in the market if they don't get paid promptly. Also, giving performance feedback to the suppliers throughout the contract duration is also important. It's relevant in any procurement, whether it's a GLP or not. And now that you know how gender lens is applied throughout the procurement process, I also want to just summarize the best practice for UN country team that maybe can introduce. So the stock take of women-owned businesses at the country level to understand how many are there, which sectors. And prepare the list of pre-qualified women-owned businesses in the most common sectors. So it's creating like a roster. And make the procurement opportunities available on different platforms, as I mentioned earlier. And make the technical requirement in proportion to the estimated size, scope, and the value of the contract. And try to introduce gender responsive evaluation criteria in a joint procurement exercise and give priority to invite local women-owned businesses to the solicitations. And where applicable and allowed, conduct the limited competition by inviting women-owned businesses exclusively, perhaps in low-value procurement via RFQ. This method could be feasible. Work at the country operations management team level on capacity building for women-owned businesses. And don't forget the sharing best practice with the OMT, procurement harmonization working groups, and really work as a one, UN as one. And then in the next two slides, I want to talk about how UN Women does GLP. So to give you some ideas and inspirations, UN Women have been implementing gender responsive procurement for a few years now. And over several years, we have doubled our procurement spend with women-owned businesses. And a lot of this is because we have enablers and mechanisms in place. The first one is a global database of women-owned businesses, which is embedded in our e-procurement system. And we are constantly working to grow and diversify the supplier base. Secondly, we have put in place functionality in our enterprise resource planning system. This functionality we put in place is to classify suppliers by ownership so that we know who are women-owned businesses at any point in time. And we can run a report in any country office to find out how many we have and how much we spend with them. We also have Women's Empowerment Principles platform. This is a free of charge set of principles offering guidance to businesses on how to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. UN Global Compact and UN Women jointly developed this. The principles are informed by international labor and human rights standards. This is for private sector companies to sign up to and commit to more gender responsive practices. And this gives tools for companies on how to promote gender equality at the workplace. We also have an internal GLP dashboard to measure progress. So this system takes the data from ERP system, and we know how much we're spending on women-owned businesses and non-women businesses alike. And we are able to track our progress. Lastly, we have a gender evaluation criteria. So not only we put requirement, but we also put incentives. So we give them additional point in our evaluation. This sends a powerful message to all potential suppliers who may not yet be gender responsive. But then when they see that UN Women is evaluating companies based on their gender responsiveness, it's really generate the interest to become more gender responsive or start thinking about it. Because they see gender responsiveness is not only the right things to do, but makes a good business sense. I'll explain more about UN Women's example gender responsive criteria now. So there are several criteria that we can use or we are using. First one is requirement for bidders to be owned or led by women, or requirement for bidders to have corporate policies in place to promote gender equality. This could be a fair maternity, paternity leave provisions, equal pay, fair and safe working conditions for women, or including prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. Or when we procure, let's say, institutional service for research, we want to select the service provider with a gender balance in a project team. So our requirement would be, for example, the composition of the proposed project team should be 50% women. And in case we are subcontracting, we may allocate additional criteria and a point for vendors if they subcontract with women-owned businesses or gender responsive suppliers as their tier suppliers. An easier way of doing all of the things I mentioned now is to allocate points to signatory of Women's Empowerment Principles, the platform I mentioned that was established by UN Global Compact and UN Women. So the reason why this is the easiest way is because to be a signatory of Women's Empowerment Principles, the companies must have met all of the points I mentioned now, and the platform can check that for you. UN Women also use women's ownership as a tiebreaker. This means that when we have two more or less identical offers, the supplier who is owned by women will be the winner. UN Women are very transparent about it. So all of our tender documents have a clause about tiebreaker, and all bidders are aware of it. So there's no surprise. And finally, I'll hand over to Najmo from Bangladesh. On behalf of a UN country team procurement working group to talk about the example in Bangladesh. Over to you, Najmo.
Thank you, Mio, for giving me actually a wonderful opportunity to share actually our country office some presentations. Before starting, actually, I would like to introduce myself with you. This is Nazmul. I'm the working in UN Women Procurement Associate as in UN Women Bangladesh. And I'm also active member of the procurement working group under the BOS in UN Agency Bangladesh. So, colleague, I'm going to close my video so that content can be more focused. It is our immense pleasure to share our experience about the workshops that held in 18 August 2022 with regards to the gender responsive procurement with the intervention of OMT, UNRC team, and all UN agency procurement working group members. In Bangladesh, a reasonable amount of procurement is done by the UN agency in 2021, which is approx $187 millions, and which stands at the 36 positions of supplier country by procurement value. So in a workshop, actually, we tried our level best to give the a sense of how our UN business is, so that they can attract among the communities. And in that statistics mean here the lies a great opportunity for the businesses. However, the ratio of through programmatic interventions, procurement function of UN agency intend to contribute to the challenges which affect the women-owned businesses to access the public procurement tenders and contracts. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. UN and country team Bangladesh carried out a workshop with the following objectives. We have some objectives: promoting women entrepreneurship through the UN business operations strategy. Procurement is one way to close or at least narrow the gender gap. To effectively comply or apply the GRP in public procurement, there is a need for a firm commitment from the participating organization and the procurer. Finding business-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, particularly in new market, and was challenging. And UN must first identify which of its suppliers are women-owned businesses. Lastly, the objective of the workshop was to introduce UNGM to the women-owned business and inform them about the business opportunity. A formal introduction to the United Nations global market and orientation on GRP scope of work in the procurement platform. Next slide, please. Planning of the workshops. All agencies have their own database of vendors who provide the data of women-owned businesses. And planning meetings were conducted. We arranged a lot of ad hoc meetings and several meetings in order to implement such workshops. And prior to start our workshops, we had the discussion on how the budget will come and who will contribute in which portions. So a lot of the discussion among the UN procurement focal actually was happened. And finally, we agreed to float the one UI expression of interest and was circulated in every possible medias, like event management company was deployed to conduct the sessions, and social and print media engagement was there. And we finally released the press release through the print and electronic medias. Next slide, please. Planning was done and agreed by the OMT. So all plan was finally agreed, and once we get the clearance from the UNCT and led by the UN Women with the help of other UN agency, we arranged the workshops that was held in actually 18 August. And the procurement working group chair highlighted the business opportunity, and followed by that, the UNGM registration process was demonstrated, and the audience from the women-owned businesses were given the idea of different type of solicitation documents. And we have given them advice, and we actually showed them how they will prepare the bids, how they will submit the bids, and what will be the requirement in the solicitation stage that Miho already covered in some previous slide. And so all example actually we tried to give them and to manage them to participate in the bidding process. After that, the Q&A session was opened up for the females, entrepreneur and participant, and all the UN agency procurement focals answered and clarified their questions. At the end of the workshops, a few of the entrepreneur feedback was recorded. Next slide, please. Internal stakeholders such as UN project manager, program staff, and even procurement personnel, we assume that actually the lack of understanding on the GRP idea. And the course of external parties like the vendors have a little knowledge on GRP. Therefore, to familiarize the stakeholder with the concept of the concept on the GRP was a challenge. And each agency has their own mandate and priorities to convince them to agency to agree on to consider the GRP in the procurement services, which was a bit challenge for us. And women business owner faces a lot of the various hurdles in every state because of in our country context, and there was some social cultural expectations, norms in the Bangladesh context. Even to participate in such workshop, they face additional obstacles, such as participating in the workshop with their father, husband, brother. That was a little bit chance. So they carried their parents and or the husband or the brother in their workshops. During the workshop, we actually observed such sort of the things. While the participation was very encouraging, it is also true that the managing their expectation was a little bit challenged. They thought this workshop would give them direct benefit to the access to the UN business opportunity, and they might have get favor being the women-based organization, but it was not like that. It was felt strongly that policy limitation for implementing the GRP is a great challenge. Next slide, please. The overall outcome of the workshop was very positive. The participants were more enlightened about the UN business opportunity. The demonstration of the UN registration process resulted in 122 more WP. And surprisingly to mention is that during our expression of interest or the solicitation stage, we received more than 244 interest among the communities. And based on our screening criteria, we selected the 155 participants in the workshop. Seeing the encouraging number of the participants and the overall discussion, obviously a positive change in the perception was observed among the UN colleagues. And the workshop registration process already helped to create a database which can be used by all agencies in the futures. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Training on capacity enhancement for all UN agency procurement focal for supporting in integrating GRP consideration in procurement planning, bidding process, executions, and the database developed from the workshop needs to be validated by the OMT to use for the tendering purposes. And affirmative action can help the women-owned businesses to come forward. For example, competition for local purchases, request for quotation, micro-purchasing, and such things can be limited to the women-owned businesses. And individual agencies should analyze the data at a certain interval to see the situation is improved or not. If not, then what necessary steps should be taken to achieve the goal. Thanks for your patience for hearing, and I would now hand over again to Miho for the rest of our presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Najmel. It's really exciting to hear that the country started this important work and hit the milestone, and also a lot more, follow-up actions coming around. So thank you so much for inspiring us all, Najmel. So the next slide is actually last slide from our end, just to talk about GRP from the perspective of BOS methodology. So the first step is, of course, the BOS take on existing gender responsive procurement processes in a joint procurement works to find out how much you procure actually right now from women-owned businesses. This is your baseline because you need to understand where you are starting from to monitor the progress. And the second step is BOS opportunity analysis. And it's about the market research. You map out local women-owned businesses and find out which sectors and categories these women-owned businesses locate and match them with the relevant UN joint procurement for goods and services to identify opportunities suitable for women-owned businesses. That's something that the UNCT Bangladesh is planning to do. Then thirdly, there is the BOS cost-benefit analysis. So this is the usual BOS methodology where you calculate cost avoidance and the quality, except in addition to the regular analysis, you'll also calculate the share of women-owned businesses or the share of the spend that goes to women-owned businesses. This is one of the simplest ways to show the social impact on gender equality in the procurement. And then you incorporate this into BOS result framework. The last step is monitoring. As you monitor your standard BOS KPIs on cost avoidance and quality, you can also monitor the social impact on gender equality, which is basically, as I said, the share of spend with women-owned businesses. With that, we come to the end of our part of the presentation. We hope there are plenty of food for thought to kickstart GLP in your BOS work. And now I want to hand over to my colleague Anton, procurement specialist in UN Women Headquarters, for the discussion and question and comment. Over to you, Anton.
Thank you very much, Miha. Thank you very much, Najmul and colleagues, for the presentation. So far, we have received only one question, and it is rather a request for recommendation. It states that identified women-owned business groups, how can we work with them so that they lose the prejudice or the fear of working with UN agencies? There are a number of recommendations, and there is flexibilities for communication. And that, of course, depends on the policies and procedures within the respective agencies. That being said, for example, in UN Women, there is, we have implemented certain clauses in our solicitation documents, which invite and encourage the participation of women-owned businesses and outline specific possibilities and flexibilities for consideration when evaluating women-owned businesses. So in that, in that regard, of course, that is due to our mandate, and that is one of the possible ways for communication. Another example, it is specifically an example, is the e-procurement system, where we have implemented clauses, and during the registration there is information available for the suppliers on the participation of women-owned businesses and the encouragement of participation. We do have also, it was a joint collaboration through the development, which resulted in the development of a document or a guide on women-owned businesses and gender responsive procurement altogether. We can share that in chat, and it is publicly available, which includes also some recommendations in relation to working with gender responsive suppliers, with women-owned businesses overall. So we will share that in chat, and hopefully that would also be helpful. It is called The Power of Procurement, How to Source from Women-Owned Businesses. So thank you very much. And I believe the next would be a live question from Hussein.
Hello? Hello?
Yes, hi.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you for the presentation. And I just wanted to say, I mean, I like what I heard about Bangladesh and like how the women came and they had to have their brothers and their fathers with them. I mean, I hope you guys, I hope it can get better there. I mean, I know there's a cultural restriction somehow. But anyway, my question was, you know, how you guys tend to look for, what's the word? Sorry. The service providers who are, you know, who are empowered by women more. Like we've had this case where we've seen people, you know, they send us emails and at the end they're like, you know, women owned or empowered by women or stuff. Is there some way we can fact check that, or is there do you guys do that? Like, you know, anybody can say, you know, yeah, we're empowered by women. Yeah, we do that. Is there like some sort of logo you guys use, or is just everybody's free to say it?
We are saying thank you so much for that question. It's a very important question. Yes.
Yes.
We do fact check because, well, they have to, first of all, well, anyone can self-declare, but we need to see the registration, right? Company registration.
Yeah.
Also, when we filter the UNGM, you can filter by ownership. And then when they say they are women-owned businesses, well, it could be that the self-declaration, but in any case, we do check, but we don't have, you know, that logo as such to assign these women-owned businesses to really,
okay.
Yeah, just a handpick or something. But as we mentioned in the presentation, this is the platform that jointly developed by UN Global Compact and UN Women, which is the Women's Empowerment Principles. In there, the companies kind of commit to, they sign up for these principles, and then their CEO write a statement, and there's some verification check going on to sign up for these principles. So at the back end, these kind of questions are already certified, verified, checked, and then these companies regarded as a gender responsive vendors.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I see your point. Yeah. Okay, so yeah. So we can do our part as well. I mean, if you guys are using that, we could also maybe search for registration or such instances if you want to incorporate that. But yeah, thank you for highlighting it as well, and thank you for the nice presentation.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I don't see any other comments on the chat. I don't know if
Thank you. I think
yeah.
there is, I think, two questions, I believe. One is whether we can share examples of your evaluation criteria and some of the clauses you're including in your tenders contracts. I think following the session, we would be disseminating a Q&A with questions and answers, and we can include those, but they are publicly available. So for RFPs published by UN Women, there are different examples, and just to note that they're not necessarily aimed at women ownership. It is important to know that gender responsiveness overall is taken into consideration. So the legal entity may obtain points not just for the ownership, but for gender parity in the project team, for having or implementing gender policies within the organization and gender equality procedures within the organization, which is also quite important. These are just some of the examples. The acceptance and the participation in WEBs is another one, the women empowerment principles. So not just women ownership, but I think we can include those in the Q&A after this session. And I also see there is a question in the Q&A which states that by using a women-owned business criteria in conducting evaluation and eventual awarding of tenders, won't we get accused of doing systematic discrimination? So as mentioned, women-owned business status is not the only criteria that is taken into consideration. There are different criteria that may result in obtaining points. for gender responsive suppliers and implementation of gender responsive considerations, which are of course part of wider sustainability and sustainability criteria, which are available on UNGM. So that being said, as Miho mentioned in the presentation, the developments are currently done and planned by the GRP task force within the Sustainable Procurement Working Group under the HLCMPN would include the guidance tools and the necessary toolkits, which would detail the different application of a gender responsive affirmative action and gender responsive procurement, including consideration of not just women-owned business status, but also other aspects and UN entities, once of course implemented or endorsed by HLCMPN, agencies and UN entities would be free to choose the options and the relevant criteria to apply, be it the status of the legal entity, and be it the responsiveness of the vendor and their consideration to sustainability overall and to gender responsive considerations specifically. We also would like to take the opportunity, because we only have a few minutes left, to remind all participants to kindly fill out the feedback for this webinar. And we, of course, will be and looking forward to your participation in the future webinars, which we try to schedule regularly with DCO and with the BOS team. So we look forward to your participation and your feedback. The link is in chat. So thank you very much. I think there are no more questions at this time.
Okay, thank you guys for the presentation. Thank you, Diego, for organizing as well, as usual.
Hey, you're most welcome, and thank you everyone for joining. There is one last slide that we wanted to just kind of show and highlight the next webinars on disability inclusion. So we welcome you to join us. There's from ICT, accessible ICT, inclusive HR, and physical accessibility. It's been a series, and we'll also be not only sharing the recording of this webinar and all these disability inclusion and other high impact services, but we'll also have them all in our YouTube channel. So we'll also be sharing that link so that you can reference them as needed, as well as all the guidance documents that are on the UNSDG website. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Miho, Anton, UN Women colleagues, Najmul, and all the Bangladesh colleagues as well that joined us. And we look forward to seeing you in the next sessions. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.